Okay, we're in London today. We're at the Humanist UK in East London, and we're going to interview Andrew Copson, me for Talk Beliefs, and you for Reason Now.
Yeah, I'm going to be talking about his last book, Secularism, and Mark's going to be talking about humanism and the work he does there, and you'll see him popping up on our channel soon.
So in we go.
Andrew Copson, thanks so much for your time today. So you're the Chief Executive of Humanist UK and have represented humanist organizations before the House of Commons and United Nations. You've contributed to many books on atheism and humanism and have recently authored the book Secularism, Politics, Religion and Freedom. So Andrew, I know you didn't have a religious background, but what are your first memories of encountering people with faith who perhaps, I don't know, proselytized at you? And what were your first thoughts about them?
That's a good question. I'm plumbing the depths there of memory. There was once a vicar who came round to our house, I remember. But my mum didn't let him in. I think when they go to new parishes, you know, they introduce themselves to people, or at least that's what I thought he was doing. So that he had almost no impression on me at all, apart from as a sort of inconvenience to my mum when she was trying to do other things. I did ask to go to Sunday school.
You asked?
When I was a child. Because I had a friend who was going, or I was sort of vaguely interested in it or something, and I did go for some weeks, and I even won a prize actually. There you go. This is an exclusive reveal. I won a prize for colouring in the story of Ruth, which I can't now remember what the story of Ruth is.
No, I can't.
But it didn't make much impression on me. And it was quite a dreary sort of place, you know, it was some dreary sort of church, and it smelled rather odd, and the people who were running the Sunday school were sort of rather strange enthusiasts, and I remember thinking there's a bit off, you know, there's something a bit wrong with this, so I didn't go back after a few weeks. It had absolutely no intellectual or emotional impact on me at all. I suppose I first met believing religious people at school, sort of in the sixth form. I became aware that there were Christians. I think only Christians. Yeah, I mean, my primary school was quite ethnically diverse, but in those days, it's early to mid 80s, that diversity didn't automatically mean religion like it does now when people talk about diversity. It really meant ethnic diversity. So, I mean, I had friends who, in retrospect, their parents were probably Sikhs or Muslims, but I didn't know it. They probably didn't even know it either, you know. So the first religious people I met were in my secondary school at sort of sixth form time, Christians, and I just remember thinking it was a bit odd, really. And I think that's quite typical of people like me who have been raised in a humanist or a non-religious environment, is that when you do encounter religion, and specifically people who believe in the truth of religious propositions and stories, you sort of think it's a bit strange, because for you, those stories are stories like any other human creation.
And for them, it's their lives.
And for them, it's their lives. And presumably at some point they've been told they're true.
Yeah.
Whereas to anyone who hasn't been told that from an early age, looking at them from the outside, they're obviously not true. Right? so it's I remember thinking it was quite odd. Now, there was nothing aggressive or proselytising about it. I think maybe there was one person with sort of like the zeal in her eyes who joined the school at sixth form, who did sort of try and press these ideas on me, but I wasn't interested. No one was, I don't think, and so she didn't go any further. When I was at university, I studied classics and ancient and modern history, and in the end majored on the classical Athenian democracy on the one hand, and shooting, you know, thousands of years forwards, Enlightenment Europe and America in the 18th century. So I didn't have any religious intellectual influence on it whatsoever. I mean, I skipped out the Christianity bit almost completely in chronological terms, going straight from pre-Christian Greece and Rome to sort of, you know, post-Christian or at least non-Christian Europe and America, and the humanist intellectual culture of that time. So No, it didn't really have any. I do remember that at university during the Christian Mission Week, where they had to leave bread outside the doors of people they thought needed Christ in their lives, I do remember there was a large pile of bread outside my door from different people who'd given me their loaves. But apart from that, no.
Okay. So when people think of humanism, they think of secularism and vice versa, but they go hand in hand, but they're not the same thing. So if someone were to ask you that, how would you first define humanism, and then how would you define secularism?
Yeah, there is this confusion. I mean, atheism as well, atheism, humanism, secularism, all these words. And they're all used differently by different people all the time and have been for as long as they have been words.
Yeah.
So that is a problem. It's increased, of course, by the fact that a word like humanism in particular has equivalents in all other languages, which often have completely different meanings, completely different etymologies sometimes as well. So, you know, someone who speaks English as a second language and talks about humanism, but really means humanismus because they're actually German, or humanitas because they're actually, you know, a Catholic or whatever, again is bringing a new, and this is the problem with the English language because everyone speaks it now, and therefore, especially in complicated terms like this, you know, philosophical terms or in ideas, the water becomes very muddy very quickly. Humanism in English as a word has a very brief history, although the word humanist has been in English since the Renaissance to describe very narrowly a classical scholar. In Johnson's dictionary, the first English dictionary, the word humanist was defined as just a grammarian, so a student of languages.
Right.
So the word humanist has been around for a very long time, and those sorts of humanists are the great Renaissance scholars like Erasmus or More or whatever, you know, people who started to uncover classical learning and apply it well in the case of Erasmus, not so well in the case of Thomas More. And that's been around for some time, but the word humanism only started being used in English in the 19th century, and was a borrowing from the German humanismus. Now, at the point that the word humanism started being used in English, it broadly, well, from the start, had two chief meanings. One was as a way to describe that culture of the Renaissance and of the pre-Christian classical world, its learning, its philosophy, its approach to literature, and so on. And that was one sort of humanism. And usually today we would call that Renaissance humanism.
I see.
And then another sort of humanism, which broadly denoted an approach to life, an approach to ethics specifically quite often, which, contrary to the idea that morality might be defined by divine means, said that instead it was human well-being that mattered in moral calculations, more specifically the well-being of all humans, more extensively the well-being also of other animals that could suffer,
of course,
and allied with a naturalistic and scientific view of the universe. And that's the use of the word humanism that is really predominant in English today, at least in the UK. It's the version of humanism that humanist organisations all use in their talking about humanism. It's the humanism that I wrote my book, the Handbook on Humanism with Anthony Grayling, about a few years ago, and that's the humanism that I promoted in my work. So a non-religious approach to questions of meaning, of value, and of truth. Secularism, again, is a word with a long history. Again, a word that began in the 19th century, coined by George Jacob Holyoake, who was a social activist. He was leaning on the Enlightenment ideas of previous generations, but trying to apply them more broadly in a more practical way. Right. He was the founder of the secularist and humanist movements in the UK, and also of the cooperative movement. So a amount of broad sympathies. And he meant the word secularism to mean sort of a non-religious basis for the matters to do with this world, which he thought could in principle be shared by religious and non-religious people alike. Yes. To be a common ground. Today, some people still use the word secularism to mean that, especially in the United States, but in UK English at least, the word secularism has become a way of capturing and defining a certain approach to politics, and specifically a certain approach to the state, the separation of church and state and so on and so forth. So that's humanism and secularism. Atheism, which is often conflated in there too. Well, atheism has nothing to do with secularism, really.
Lack of belief in a god or gods.
Just a lack of belief in God or gods. So all humanists would be atheists, or at least agnostics, because they'd be people who had a naturalistic view of the universe and believed things on evidence rather than on other grounds. But obviously an atheist could be anything else as well. They could be a nihilist or a Buddhist or a humanist or whatever, or Marxist. So atheism, I think, is not a very interesting concept.
Right. So, Andrew, there must be some people who come up to you and say, you probably wish for a world without religion. So I'm going to put that to you, Andrew. Do you think the world would be better off without religion?
Do I think the world would be better off without religion? That's a very difficult question to answer, because it instantly you could instantly be saying, do you think the world would be better off without religious people? And of course that sounds a bit genocidal. I think that if no one in the world today had religious beliefs or religious identities, I think that we would be better off. Now, I'm sure that people would adopt other dangerous or divisive beliefs and identities. So I'm not saying that we would be.
It could be replaced
much better off.
Yeah.
Likely to be replaced by something else. But I think, on balance, yes, we would be better off. Do I wish for such a world? Well, it seems strange to say that you think that a world we would be better off if X applied, and then say that you didn't wish for X. But I'm not sure I do wish for it, because I personally think that one of the ways in which human life is enriched is through the presence in our world of diversity, of different ideas, of different opinions, of different people. I think intercultural encounter, or even the encounter between two individuals in society, is made much more fulfilling by difference. And I think one of those differences is our adherence to different ways of living. So I personally think that perhaps life might be less colourful or less fulfilling if the world had no religion. I think probably...
Is there an ideal secular world that you would look to?
By secular you mean not religious?
Yes.
Well, I definitely think that international politics and all national politics should be secularist. I mean, I think that all states should be secular, and that's plenty to be getting on with, don't you think?
Yes, definitely.
In itself, that's unlikely to happen. So, I certainly think that that's right. I mean, my ideal vision of the future, to borrow that of a great humanist, Gene Roddenberry, would probably be the Star Trek vision of the future, where
we think alike.
Obviously, really, there you go. Obviously, there's great diversity of culture. Cultural traditions are respected, in this future Earth, but there's plainly no religious belief. And I think that would be a pretty good world to live in.
It would be cool, definitely. And we have this little problem in Britain known as faith schools.
Yes.
That is strictly Christian or Muslim or, say, Jewish schools who use their holy book as the standard and often just disregard science. Now, as you know, Ofsted just recently deemed a Christian school, I think it was in South London, as inadequate. I think they were using creationism. So why do you think faith schools persist in this day and age? And what's the best way to handle them?
Faith schools don't just persist, they're growing in number, both in raw terms and as a proportion of state schools generally in England. I mean, it's important to say it's only in England that it's happening in the UK. How to deal with it? Well, since 2002, they've been growing in number. Before that, they were declining in number. So why was it that in 2002 faith schools started to increase? Well, the two guilty parties, as it were the government, of course, which decided that the association between higher exam results and religious character was something they wanted to see more of. Now, in fact, their conclusion was erroneous. It's not religious character that leads to higher exam results, but I think they generally thought it was. David Blunkett, as education certainly thought it was. So they wanted that. and they also wanted to put more schools out to community groups generally. And the second guilty party was the Church of England, which decided that it wanted to radically increase the number of state schools that it controlled. And I don't think there's any doubt as to why that was, because they have declining numbers of believers, and they want to secure for themselves an enduring social purpose at state expense. So, of course, that's what they want to do, and they published a report in 2002 to grow this. Now, in addition to that, there were some groups from minority faiths, Muslims were the only serious ones, who for the previous 15 or 20 years had been trying to get state Muslim schools on the same level as state Christian schools, which of course have been in the system for a very long time, since 1944. And this was an opportune moment for them to press their case, and they pressed it, of course. Therefore, the government wasn't in a position to resist it, even if it had wanted to resist it, simply on the grounds of equal treatment. And when they were going about expanding church schools, they could hardly say to people from other religions, "Oh yes, but only Christian ones, not anyone else." So that's the origin of it. Now, apart from Catholic schools, Catholic and Jewish schools maybe, faith schools are not popular even with a minority of parents, not particularly popular with a minority of parents. So when you ask the question of how to deal with them, that's something to take into account. Where's the pressure coming from to set up new religious schools? Largely from big religious organisations, churches, to some extent from government, but in recent times, since the Blair years, really normally only as part of a bigger agenda of wanting state schools to be run not by the state, by anyone else. Surprise, surprise, the people who are most interested in taking them up are religious groups who've got an agenda to pursue of their own. How do we stop them? Well, I think we have to try and mobilise that vast majority of parents and the population who thinks they're a bad idea, and also to point out to government the lack of any evidence for strong educational outcomes as a result of religious character, because almost all of the educational outcomes that are prized in state faith schools are actually the outcome of selection, which state faith schools, not all of them, but a large number of them, are able to practice.
Right. Now, I think it's about, you might have to correct me if I'm wrong, 40% of the British public subscribe to humanist values, but don't necessarily think of themselves as humanists or even call themselves that. So is that because people are naturally evolving to embrace humanist values, do you think?
Well, that's an interesting question. It's not quite 40%. I wish it were that high. It's not quite. So there's lots of different ways of measuring both religiosity and humanism, actually, in the population as a whole. So one thing you can do is you can measure identity. You can just ask people, do you see yourself as any of these things, Christian or non-religious, humanist? And when you ask people that question of identity, about 6% of people say that they're non-religious and humanists, right? So 6% sounds very small, and it is. But it's worth pointing out it's more than Muslims, Jews, Buddhists, whatever else. So although 6% seems small, it's higher than all the non-Christian religions in the country. So even on identity grounds, humanism is, or should be, quite strong. As you correctly say, outside of identity and instead in the world of beliefs, the number of humanists is much greater. It's probably between 25 and 30%. Right. Depending on quite how you define it.
That is a hopeful figure for the future.
It's a hopeful figure, and it's extremely more hopeful because it grows down the generations. So if you're in your 30s, it's a much higher proportion of people who have humanist beliefs than people in their 70s, and that looks like a generational trend. And people who have Christian beliefs are much lower in younger generations than in higher.
So we could be looking for a really humanist world soon.
Yeah, I think so. In the UK, at least, I think so. But as you say, people will have those beliefs, but they won't necessarily have that identity. Right. And I think that is to some extent a problem. I mean, this I think is a cause of disagreement amongst humanists. Does it matter, as long as people have got the humanist beliefs? Does it matter that they don't have humanist identity? I think it does matter. I mean, I'm an opponent of identity politics. I don't think that identity should matter as much as it has started to matter in some areas of our life, especially in our global region. But I do think it's important for people to know that their beliefs and to really feel, not just to know but to feel, that their beliefs are not just an assortment of sort of common sense background beliefs, but that they came from somewhere, you know, in terms of civilization and human progress. And I think it's important that people have a word to describe what they.
It's not just humans evolving, but humanity evolving.
Yeah, well, no, that's true.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
Yes.
But, and so I think that people should be, you know, enabled and educated to be able to use the word humanist about their own beliefs, if that's what those beliefs are. I mean, the other good news, if you want to see it this way, is that although 25 to 30% of people are humanists in that they tick all the right answers, as it were, on the survey, because that's how these things are usually arrived at. They ask 4 or 5 questions about beliefs and values, about truth, meaning, and so on, and there's a humanist answer, and the people who give the humanist answer to every question are that 25 to 30%. But the good news is that the humanist answer to those questions is given in the instance of each question by over 60% of the population. So even those who don't have all these beliefs and values, a majority of people have at least one of them. So humanist beliefs, individual beliefs, not just the whole humanist worldview, humanist beliefs are spread through the population at quite a level. And if you compare it with people who have mainstream Christian beliefs, for example, those who believe in God and that Jesus was the Son of God, so we've got a figure for people who believe in God, believe that Jesus was the Son of God, and that he rose from the dead. Right? And those 3 things are pretty core Christian beliefs. And only about 15 to 16% of people in the country actually believe that. So Christian beliefs are very low.
Interesting.
And compared with humanist ones, extremely low.
Well, we will wrap up now, Andrew, but just quickly, what's the most memorable thing that a religious person has ever said to you? I think the big questions or something.
I think the most memorable thing that a religious person has ever said to me is that I had a very dear colleague in the world of religious education, because I was for 9 years on the Religious Education Council. And I can't remember what happened. I was some paper wasn't right or something was dubious, and I said, "Oh, Jesus Christ," and meaning as a sort of like curse, you know. And he sort of winced, and I said, "Oh, you're right." And he's like, "Oh, it's so awful for me to hear that." You know, he was a very devout Christian, and I was so devastated that I don't think I've ever said it again.
Oh my goodness! Yes, I have the same thing in my own family.
I just didn't realise how horrible it would be.
Taking the Lord's name in vain.
Yeah, I know, and I felt so bad about it, because of course for me it wasn't. I didn't even think about the impact it would have on him. So I've never done it again. So there you are. That must be some sort of impact, mustn't it?
Excellent. Andrew Copson, thank you very much indeed for what you do and for talking with us today on Talk Beliefs.
Thank you.